Hey there, internet friends. Welcome to another episode of That Nerdy Site Show, a weekly podcast where the team members from That Nerdy Site get together to talk about our lives and all of the nerdy things we love about them. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and joining me this week we have Logan Wilkinson. How you doing, Logan? You muted yourself.
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
There you go. I saw you push the button. I was like, oh, had he muted himself and was unmuting himself? And then you came in silent. I was like, nope, other way around. I am doing good. It's been a nice relaxing weekend. Got to have a nice little family lunch with the family at Raising Cane's today. Am almost certain that a guy who was there in like the booth was a guy I went to high school with. But nice. A guy I probably haven't actually seen in person for
15 years,
20 years, 20 years. At this point, or like 19, 20 years. So I was like, I'm pretty sure that's Matt. But also, like, even if it is, I would maybe only vaguely know that from like Facebook, and even Facebook, I don't see him on ever. Right. So it was just like but it was like he was in my direct line of view while like visiting with the family at lunch. So I just kind of kept seeing him over like people's shoulder and was like, I think that's him, but I don't know. But maybe I don't know. Yeah, whatever. Anyway, other than that, it was quite uneventful. Just kind of enjoying the time.
I know.
So today we're going to be talking all about Andor.
We're ready for it.
I've already given a lot of my thoughts on the series when Cameron and I did our That D Plus full season episode back at the beginning of December that Logan was unable to join us for. But Logan has been champing at the bit to talk Andor, so that's pretty much what we're going to do today. It's pretty much just going to be full Andor Spoilercast mode. Stay tuned for that. If you like what you hear, please remember to like, subscribe, rate, review, share the podcast everywhere you can, all that fun stuff. So Logan, kick it off. What'd you think of Andor?
Yeah, it's really good. I think it even is saying like full spoiler cast, which obviously it is, and we're going to get into the spoilers. It's such an interesting show in a spoilery sense as well, right? Obviously, the fact that it is a prequel series before Rogue One, and we know that Andor is going to, like, obviously, spoiler alert for that movie, he's going to die there, right? Like, makes it sort of intriguing, right? So that can make it... Prequels are tricky, right? We've talked a lot about this on many That Nerdy Site shows and podcasts.
That introduced Andor to the world, yeah. Like,
right,
Rogue One being the prequel done right.
Right, yeah, exactly, right? And, like, they're just... Prequels are really hard to do. And we spent a lot of time talking about them on various That Nerdy Site shows. So much time, I feel like. And they so often go wrong, right? And I think the, prequel stories that do them well, Rogue One being one of the gold standards, obviously The Godfather Part 2 being another one, I think sort of have a lot of similarities, and or being a prequel to a prequel, so it can get really tricky to kind of keep the stakes up high, and it does it so well, right? Like, I've read a lot of like criticism and reviews and kind of analysis of Andor in the past, 3-4 months since it first aired. And I still think one of my favorite lines is the fact that Andor is a great TV show that just happens to be set in Star Wars, and that universe. And I think it's so true, and especially in the early half of that show, like, you can be forgiven to forget that this is set during like the Star Wars galaxy, right? Because it is just such a gritty, grounded, in the kind of weeds show, and every single part of it seems to just work on like all cylinders a go, right? Like it is shocking how expertly crafted this is, right? And Tony Gilroy is a phenomenal storyteller in general, right? And he brought that here. And I think watching Andor in the context of our conversations we've had both on podcast and off about Star Wars, we talk about Star Wars a lot at that nerdy site, spoiler alert. And so I think it's really interesting, especially I think back to a lot of the convos me and you had earlier this year when I was in Phoenix and we watched Book of Boba Fett together, and kind of some of the concerns I had around that series that I think, to be fair to me, did ultimately kind of pan out to what that series is going to be and the issues it was going to have. And I think Andor just doesn't have any of them right. I think it's just a really smartly crafted, tightly constructed story that is both so intimately focused on this character and the kind of people swarming around him, but is also such a vastly larger story that can be related to kind of the present state of the world, right? And like alt-right movements, and obviously Star Wars and like its fascination with fascism and Nazism goes back to the very origins of what Star Wars is. And that's all there. And I love how unabashedly political Andor is. I think it is a just brilliant television series.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things I like about it that continues on kind of what we really liked about Rogue One is Rogue One introduced us to a bunch of characters that we didn't really know how their story was going to end, because it was like you had a pretty good feeling that there was going to be a lot of tragedy involved, but they could have also got the Death Star plans and made their way out of there, and it hadn't ended.
Right. I did not go into Rogue One thinking everyone was going to die. That was not the expectation I had when I went into that movie.
Exactly. Right? And so I like another thing I like about this is so many of the characters that we're introduced to in this, we don't know how their story ends. Like we know Cassian, we know more or less Mon Mothma. We know Melshi, I guess, as Cassian's buddy. There are both going to end up on Scarif, and maybe there's like one or two other characters that have like are touching other Saw Gerrera. We know his ending, and that's pretty much it. So everybody else, like we don't know them in the future at some point, but. Right. Especially like the ISB characters or something like that. It's like, well, maybe they're just continuing to do stuff on Coruscant, and we never revisit Coruscant post prequel trilogy, really. So I think it just gives them so much freedom of movement, and it can very much be what this story is of like, this is a story about Cassian turning from the person we meet him as here to the person we meet him as in Rogue One. And one of the things I've continued finding myself thinking about in the weeks since this all wrapped up, because I imagine you were like me and like many out there of like, why is this a show that feels the need to be made coming into it?
Right.
Like, such low expectations, such like but why this guy? Why are we telling a Cassian story? And as I continued to think about it, especially after the show was done, I found myself thinking, you know what? Like, why not Cassian? Because Cassian is arguably the most fascinating character character introduction in all of Star Wars. Our introduction to Cassian is this rebel who kills his own ally because does the very bad thing, kills his own ally because he knows he's going to drag him down, and that's how he's got to escape. And like, that was such a different tone from anything we'd ever seen in Star Wars. And like, so yeah, that is a fascinating guy that I do want to get to know more of. And since we only got him in the one movie, really. And I've loved everything they did with him in this like showing how he wasn't in it to be a rebel. He's been fighting the Empire all these years and all that stuff. But like, he was doing it out of selfishness or out of vengeance or revenge or anger and stuff. And there wasn't like a greater cause. And we start seeing how that greater cause gets built over the course of this season, and potentially will continue to be built under the guidance of Luthen in season 2. And so like getting to like knowing where this character ends is very fascinating, because you can start the character somewhere completely different and you have a built-in, okay, how do we get him from point A to point B?
Right.
Let's send him on. Let's send him this very personal like quest. Let's send him on this heist where he meets this like this like very altruistic guy, Keeman. What's his name? I forget his name now. But the little revolutionary guy who gets crushed in Aldhani.
It's like Nimke. It's like Nimic. Thank you. That's the one I was looking for. Yep.
Yeah. So and
we
that
both
guy,
just rewatched this series too.
Exactly. Yeah. I've rewatched all these episodes in the last 2 days, but it is all just like a bum rush of a kind of thing. And also, as Star Wars always has, a bunch of weird names. But and I love that in the Aldani sequence he meets both Nemec and Skeen, who is like, he could have gone down the path of Skeen and just been ruthless, and but no, he still has some kind of like morals and guidance and stuff like that, and then throw him into jail where he gets completely broken down and says, all right, yeah, fuck these guys.
Right.
And like even the introduction of who Marva and Clem are, his parents, his adopted parents, kind of thing, and like the glimpses that we get of their outlooks on life and how that fuels who Cassian ends up becoming is all like, they just do such a great job of like introducing all these little building blocks to give you a picture of, here's who this person, like here's why this person becomes the person we will know in Rogue One. Really good stuff. Yeah, go ahead.
I just think that, especially this stuff, I mean, all the stuff with Marva and Clem, especially in the last episode, I think, and sort of the payoff, you get to see more and more of Clem as the series goes on, and more of that character and the role he played for Cassian. But also, I mean, Fiona Shaw is fantastic, right? I mean, I think both of us probably first know her from being Aunt Petunia from Harry Potter, right? But like
Super Mario Brothers. Because she was in the Super Mario Brothers movie.
You're right. Actually, way back in the day.
But yes, she's most widely known as Aunt Petunia.
Yeah, and to see her, and that's largely, especially after the first couple movies, a thankless role in some ways, right? And so to see her really just shine, right, and just chew up every scene she's in, and just kind of be so fantastic, and the emotional beat she has with Cassian after episode 7 comes to a close, right? And them never meeting face to face again, but given, you know, one of the most stirring speeches in a series that's chock full of them. It's hard to pick which is the best speech here. There are a lot of contenders, but certainly one of the best. And I think the one that had sort of the most work to do in terms of being a summation of the entire 12 episode kind of thesis to date. And yeah, I mean, she's great. And I love all of her scenes with Cassian, and there is this genuine love to them, right? And the fact that one of the most emotionally affecting moments of the series could be someone else saying her final words to Cassian, but it still hit like a sledgehammer, right? I think just gets to how well those characters' bonds and relationships were fleshed out, and how much depth there was to all three parties involved in that. And yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the emotional journey that Andor takes you on is great, right? And especially with episode 7, right? And how, you know, Cassian's like, you know, kangaroo court imprisonment happens and all the stuff there, and the way that I think Andor really smartly gets into stuff about, like, you know, the prison industrial complex, right? And also just like how like police can operate for people who aren't from there, right? And who are like minority backgrounds and all that kind of stuff. And it's really smart. It's really clever.
And also just the utter lack of due process.
Right. And just the yoke of oppression, right, that Nemec talks about so much, but right, that more people kind of shed light on, I think is really great, right? And I think it can seem like a really weird time to set this story in the Star Wars kind of chronology, like 5 years out from the events of Rogue One and episode 4. But it's also really interesting because this is probably the Empire at its like zenith in some sense, right? Where it's like right before it's really challenged in any real ways, like right where we have the Empire right now, right? Before their rebellion is really started to blossom into anything, right? Like you're kind of seeing the first stirrings of that. And so this is also sort of the most interesting look at like what the Empire could be. Like it's had a decade and a half to settle in and just kind of have that yoke spread and just kind of grind people down, right? As Marva says, like, to just have them to kind of fall asleep and not notice it, right?
Yeah, I mean, like,
and so I think it's a fascinating time.
Yeah, the series definitely sets up the idea that the Empire has never had as big a loss as Aldani. So in the 15 years of their imperial rule, like that is the first thing that gets them to be like, all right, that this is how you guys are gonna react, then we're gonna and do the overreach thing.
We're gonna do the Patriot Act
clamp
kind of
down,
thing, right?
we're gonna
Yeah,
really
right,
like
yeah.
grip in tight. And so I think that is absolutely apt. It is, the rebels have not started unifying yet, and really
At all.
I mean, the whole series Rebels is about them starting to work together
Right.
and stuff, but they don't really all come together until A New Hope, or the tail end of Rogue One. And even there, I think like the Death Star is going to be the thing that really like brings everybody else in line, because it is still, in A New Hope, a ragtag group of people fighting this, giant force, and so like the Death Star destruction is like Aldani on the next level scale that really gets the rest of the universe to be like, oh, we can do something about this. Okay,
There's something here.
yeah. I said it in our That D Plus show, but like really like the writing in here is so great. The direction, like everything, performances are all so great across the board. That my only real complaint with the series is that it's 12 episodes instead of 4 like short films or something like that, or in some cases just straight up films. Because I think you could very easily kind of segment this out into that like escape from Ferrick's arc that we had as the first 3 episodes that all got released at once. Then you have just the Aldani heist as like episode 2, and then all the prison stuff in there as episode 3, and then the return to Ferrick's could just be kind of the end of this story. And I think those chunks of story all have a beginning, middle, and end. While there are like overarching themes and stuff throughout the rest of it, but I think those could so easily be self-contained stories that I think could have served the pacing of the series a little bit better. But if that's the complaint, then it's not much of a complaint. I think the especially like, the fact that I was only having to wait a week to watch the end of a story or something like that was definitely still like, okay, I can deal with that. It'd be a completely different story if it had been like, okay, it's going to be 4 movies over the course of 4 years or something like that. Then I would have been like, oh shit, then maybe, yeah, you should have just given this. So, it's one of those like, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. But
it'll be interesting to see what you think then, right? Because like the, way they're going to expand it in the second and last season, right, is like each 3 episode arc is going to be 1 year as they get closer and closer to New Hope, right? And it's going to like basically lead directly into Rogue One. So basically each of those 3 episode arcs are going to be like its own year. We're going to kind of have significant jumps, right? So it'll be interesting to see how they pull that off versus this all takes place roughly in like a couple months.
Yeah.
And is much more kind of like flowing, I think, naturally into one another.
I mean, the biggest time jump we get is
him in
month the month jump
yeah.
in during the prison stuff, and then everything else is like within a few days of it. So like all that stuff, yeah.
It's interesting too because we talked a little bit about this off air, but I think I like the fact that it was done episodically. I think first off, we don't have episodic TVs as much anymore. Like, thanks to streaming, and streaming is great, but I also think that, yeah, like the water cooler conversation each week, like kind of digest what the episode was and talk about it and go into that, and I was doing it at the same time and the same pace. There was just something really fun to that, I think, and allow you to kind of ponder what is going to happen next and what you've just kind of witnessed and watched, especially after each of the big like climax moments of episodes like 3, 6, 10, and 12. And I think the show, I don't know, like some of my favorite episodes were the
setup
denouement / setup, right? Like the ones that immediately followed, like the 4, the 7, and like 11 episodes, like that had to kind of deal with the consequences of what just happened in the big climax, but also start to set up the next pieces. I found to be really interesting. And episode 7 in particular, which is sort of like the pivot of the whole series, right, is like a really chill episode, but it's so, I think, smartly sets so many pieces into motion, and everything about Cassian and him just being like this beach resort town and literally doing nothing wrong and still getting thrown into prison, and that sort of being the moment that really just like breaks everything for him. And even if you just hide away and get drunk on a beach somewhere, you still can't escape the Empire, right? And that sort of being that moment for him, you can do nothing wrong and you're still going to mess with your life. I found to be really expertly done, and really effective. And everything in Narkina 5 and the whole prison section, the fact that we get so much time there, I thought was just great, right? Like, I think it's so well done. And episode 9 in particular, where it's just sort of like the days in a life at Narkina 5 and the monotony of it, and kind of just like doing the same thing again and again and again and again and again. And, you know, how that episode ends in such a powerful way, right? And, you know, never more than 12. I just think even the episodes where there isn't, you know, a blaster fired or, you know, there's no lightsabers, but any sort of action in a traditional sense, there's so much tension, right? And there's so much constantly pounding, like, heart moments that, you know, I watched it and I kind of described it as like, this is a show that I think taps a little bit into something that like Narcos does really well, right? Of like, even, or Sopranos, right? For a really old school reference, like even in an episode where no one dies or there's no guns fired, anything like that, just the dialogue alone can just convey so much menace and so much ominous and so much dread and fear and tension. And it just ratchets it up more and more and more until you can barely handle it. And then it just lets out this release. And that is something that is not easy to do. And I think it is done incredibly well here. And I think the writing is pretty much spectacular from start to finish for all 12 episodes.
Yeah, it's again, I think like this is among, if not the best writing that Star Wars has ever had. And admittedly, there are some just very weaker elements because some of the people kind of working in those elements weren't writers by trade, and that wasn't their, you know, their foray. But Tony Gilroy coming in and writing such stellar stuff, especially like you touched on like Marva's speech, but you know, also in that same thing, you have the recording of Nemec's speech about you know the power of fascism, the fragility of it, and all that stuff. You have the Luthen speech when he's talking to his like Imperial spy Lonnie, talking about how he's like he has sacrificed everything for a cause he knows he won't survive to
a sunrise he will never see. Right? Yeah, such a good line.
Even like his assistant Clea in a rewatch has like some really good stuff of like because Vel comes in is like, what have you done lately? I did Aldani, and Clea's like, I don't have lately. I have always. I am always here under threat, under guys. I'm always keeping so many plates spinning that would blow your mind and all that, like all that kind of stuff. It's like it's such just a great pool of characters, and they all are so well defined, and they're like I mean, like Cassian, of course, has multiple over the course of the season of like in whether it's talking about. Of course, I went and stole it. Like they're so proud they couldn't even imagine somebody like me coming in and like getting through their stuff, or like they're not listening. No one's listening. Nobody's listening. Why would they need to listen? All they have to do is turn that floor on twice a day, and we are at their beck and call, and all that kind of stuff. It's just such a crisply written, and especially on a rewatch, it is very sparse with its writing as well. There are long segments where it is just like visual storytelling and through cinematography and montages, or some of the just most beautiful things Star Wars ever done, like the Eye of Aldani sequence and all that stuff. But it like because especially like the first chunk of my rewatch I was doing while I was like playing games or something like that, so I kind of had it like on my phone off to the side, and it was just like if I wasn't focusing on it, I didn't know exactly what was happening on the screen, because it wasn't like, oh, here's two characters in a scene talking. It was, here's all of this establishing shots and sequences in Ferrix to tell you where all these characters are, and to just give you a sense of like the space of this world or this planet or something like that. And so when characters are speaking to one another, they're always speaking something important. There's not a line wasted in this series, and I think that's another just incredible aspect of it.
I think one thing that you touched on that I also think is so smartly done is Cassian's speech to Luthen in episode 3, where he does talk about how, they're just so smug, they're so arrogant, they wouldn't expect you to come right into the house. And that sort of being paid off in a way where, like, he just walks in the front door, basically, and then walks out the front door in episode 12, right, when he rescues Bix, right? He just walks right out because he looks like he belongs there, right? And there's no questions asked. And, I just think they set so many things up, and he walks in through the tunnel, but he walks out the front door, right? And it's just, like, so, I think, smart and clever. And even, like, I think Nimmick is a really interesting character, and, like, there's been a lot of, like, really interesting writing about him, because we get, obviously, Star Wars' sort of central beating heart is the original trilogy, and the rebellion is sort of the key aspect of that, right? And this fight against, like, this evil. But for as much time as we spend on the rebellion and the Rebel Alliance and all of the countless Star Wars stories about that, we never really get someone who kind of gives voice to it. Someone who is sort of like the ideologue, the Thomas Paine from, like, the Revolutionary War kind of thing of, like, these are the reasons why we fight. This is what we're fighting against in a larger sense than just evil and bad guys, right? And Nimmick being that person, right? Being that revolutionary and that pure sense of the word almost, is so fascinating, so odd. And even if he is doomed, I just think he's such an engrossing character. And I'm glad he got kind of brought back for that episode 12 kind of conclusion. And the fact that his speech is sort of running in the face of one of the most quoted lines in all of Star Wars, right? Which is, do or do not, there is no try, from Yoda, right? Which is one of the most, like, iconic things that people latch on to, is like, that's how you should live, right? And Nimmick is sort of saying the exact opposite, right? He's saying it's all about the effort. It's all about trying. That's the thing that matters. Because you can't guarantee success, but you can say that I did this. I went for it, right? And it's just so beautiful and so brilliant, and such a great way to open that episode and kind of set the events in motion of episode 12. And I just think it's so great, right? And I think a thing we haven't really talked about is that, like, Tony Gilroy is not a fan of Star Wars. He doesn't care about Star Wars at all, right? But I think he's someone who is also sort of liberated by that. And we talked a lot on, the James Bond rewatch show that we did. Go watch it. About the Daniel Craig era in particular, about how, he has no sacred cows, right? He's not a fan of James Bond, and that sort of allowed him this freedom to kind of do anything he wanted with that character, right? And it didn't always work, right? I think there were definitely mistakes made in some of the things that went with the Daniel Craig era, but it also led to really amazing things too, right? And if you have a Spectre that a lot of people don't like, right? You also have a Skyfall and a Casino Royale that everyone loves, right? And I think Tony Gilroy is exactly what Star Wars needs right now in this moment, especially as someone who is a huge Star Wars fan, but has had a lot of issues with really post Last Jedi, at the very least, Star Wars, right? Where I think they sort of took a lot of the wrong lessons from Last Jedi, right? Like, I don't think Last Jedi is a perfect movie by any means. It's also not my favorite Star Wars movie, but I think it did more new and weird and different stuff than anything Star Wars had done since at least the prequels, if not the original trilogy itself. And it didn't land all of them, but to kind of Nick's point, it tried so much new and different stuff, and to take these characters in a direction they'd never been before, and to deconstruct them and build them back together. And I think Disney and Lucasfilm were a little bit scared by the reaction they got from that, and they've sort of played it a lot safer since then, I think. Certainly with Rise of Skywalker, but even like Book of Boba Fett, right? And, I think Mandalorian is this weird show that is like really great, but also not necessarily the most risky thing in a lot of ways too. And especially season 2, which is the better season of The Mandalorian, but is also one that is leaning a lot more, I think, on like fan servicey, like, oh wow, holy shit moments kind of thing, to carry a lot of that story forward. And Andor is so clinical and selective about the moments of like Star Wars, like, oh, moments that it's like included in the series. And I think that just makes him that much more powerful when they happen. Like, you don't see a stormtrooper for like 3 or 4 episodes, right? You don't see a Star Destroyer until episode 6, and then it's like, oh shit, like, oh my God. Like, it really gives a sense of like just how intimidating and scary the normality of evil is, right? And the everyday face of the Empire that isn't Darth Vader or the Emperor or Inquisitors, but is just regular people doing bad things. And that's almost more terrifying, right? Because you can, with a Vader and a Palpatine,
there were a million Moff Tarkins. We only saw the one.
Right, because like Vader and Palpatine, something that is almost so cosmically, comically, purely evil, is almost in some ways easier to wrap your head around, right? That's almost easier to comprehend. Whereas someone being evil, not because they're necessarily evil, but because it's easy, and because it gets them a promotion, and because it gets them money, and that kind of thing, just the normality of how evil can spread so quickly in a system, is almost more disturbing, because it can mean evil can be anywhere and everywhere, and it's not something that you can necessarily extinguish, right? Anyone can be evil, which means evil can be everywhere, right? And that is sort of more unnerving, I think. And Andor sort of revels in that idea and those moments and those characters, and it sticks to it, right? Like, we haven't talked about it at all, really, but like, I think that the ISB Corpo stuff is some of the strongest elements of the series. And Cyril in particular is a character who I am like really fascinated by, right? Like, he's just this weird, creepy, like incel-y, alt-right fanboy kind of dude, but who's just increasingly unnerving and unsettling. And I think that performance is like really, really great. And you know, after episode 3, he sort of just has to be in the background and simmer. And I think he does such a great job of that. And just seeing how these kind of people who feel neglected and ignored and not appreciated, and why they turn to, you know, these kind of outlets, right? And why they become like a Proud Boy, or why they join like alt-right organizations or neo-Nazi movements, or these kind of things. And it shows you exactly why they do that and what sort of leads them down that path. And I think it's super just incredible to watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot to dive into there. One, I right before you brought it up, I had pulled up the Nemec speech because I was going to. I said it on the episode of that D Plus show that we'd done too, but that point of try being in direct contrast to Yoda's do or do not, there is no try. On that D Plus show, I was like, and we saw Yoda refuse to try at the end of episode 3. He does not and leaves. And so it is one of those things that I had never like growing up with that quote. You think it is so profound, and maybe that's because of the character it's coming from or something. But it was Nemec saying try, and just that simple like try as like it, which inherently will kind of like juxtapose it against this very famous quote that we you know associate with Star Wars, and just being like, oh my God, yeah, do or do not, there is no try is such like an entitled position and place of speaking from, where like you don't have to try. You're a 900-year-old Jedi. like, but for the rest of us, trying is the only thing that is going to get us through the day, or get to, like, we might not succeed, but our efforts and our trying will help somebody else down the line.
More, right.
And like it.
And there's something to be said too for the fact that like right now the show is taking place, Yoda's in hiding on Dagobah.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
That's where he's at in this fight, versus the Nemecs and, you know, everyone else who is given their life to push it that much more forward, right? Whereas Yoda is waiting for Luke to come of age, right? Which, to be fair, also works, but these things aren't necessarily happening in a vacuum, right? They're sort of feeding each other, right? And Luke, obviously, if he came of age and there was none of this that existed around him, could he have just like willed this through force alone to kind of achieve the same result? And almost certainly not, right? And so it is sort of, you need the environment, you need the Nimics and everyone else around them. You need the Cassians and the Jyn Ersos to kind of set everything up so that when Luke is able to get there to take that 1 in a million shot, the piece have been set up for him, right?
Mm-hmm. It is also like, just talking about it, it's like, oh, that's another dumb continuity thing that the prequels introduced of like Anakin being too old to be trained, and then some 30 years down the line, Yoda doesn't have any problem training a 17-year-old farm boy from Tatooine.
To be fair to Yoda, in episode 5, he very much says he's too old multiple times, and he's like, fuck it though, because I just gotta have to do it. But it's definitely, again, Star Wars works best when you just look at it as a trilogy and don't expand it at all. Otherwise, it gets real messy real fast.
Yeah, but like that it just again speaks to the writing and the clever ways that this writing can deconstruct or can just flesh out things. And to I think your point of like the version of evil that we get in this series and the oftentimes just banality of it.
Yes.
You have time over the course of a 12 episode, 45 minute, like per episode series to layer that in and to introduce that. And the fact that we don't meet Deidre Miro until episode 4, and it is like our first 3 episodes is just introduced to the Cyril Karn version of that, or then the Sergeant Mosk version of that is just like super yes man kind of guy. Like that's not a thing that films have the luxury of getting. That kind of like the closest we get to that kind of emotional resonance with a villain in recent years, I would argue, is probably Thanos in Endgame or in Infinity War, and that's because we had basically like Infinity War is Thanos's movie. All the other pieces have been introduced over the course of 20 plus movies at that point, and it is just okay. Now we can see the world from his point of view as he reaches his apex here. Or some, maybe like even Killmonger or something like that. Like it's very rare that it's been able to be done in a 2.5 hour kind of time
Black
frame.
Panther 2. I can't think of the villain's name in that one either.
Which one?
Black Panther 2's villain.
Oh yeah, Namor. Yeah. So it's just rare that in that kind of condensed timeline you can get something that is more nuanced than bad guy is bad. And getting to see just the different flavors of that in here and in the ways that it I mean, obviously so much of the success of Andor, I think, is in the way it is just very clearly holding up a mirror to our today, in so many aspects. That it was that thing of like, wasn't expecting a prison industrial complex allegory here, but there we are, and it's one of the best things I've seen all year. And just the way that like the series, I mean, is drawing on that, but is also drawing on historical revolutions and stuff like that, and historical instances of fascism for its examples. Even going back to like the flashbacks to young Casa on Knotfest, whichever Canary, young Casa on Canary, and like he walks up and you see like the big destroyed Imperial quarry is like a direct photographic reference to some other kind of like I don't remember I remember it being a thing of like Easter egg. People were like, here's what this is referencing, back when episode 2 came out or whatever, but it's very much like it's indirect like reference to just the completely like devastation of an occupying force or a colonizing kind of entity, and like the way that the show cleverly introduces just the different facets that the Empire has been doing that. Like one of the most horrifying things is that like Doctor's description of taking over the moon, and people didn't want us putting a fuel plant there. But it turns out when we kill these people, their screams have this like terrifying effect. And just the way he tells this story so like nonchalantly, but it drove some of his colleagues mad. And so he has taken it upon himself to like turn it into, it's the Christopher Guest Princess Bride, like, I'm doing this for posterity. This will take 1 year off your life kind of thing. But like, with no sense of humor behind it. It is just, I am a sinister person. This is the kind of thing that I have devoted my life to being fascinated by, and I can use it to torture you and get the information that we need out of you. And then we never hear what that sound is, but just from the setup And Bix's reaction when the headphones are put on her, like it is very much the like they don't need to show us what that is because the way they described it leaves it so much worse in our own imagination than any sound designer
Right.
was ever going to come up with. And so it's like it's even in ways like that, which is as I think we touched on that D plus show, like that is a million times better than the Boar Gullet thing that gets introduced in Rogue One, which is admittedly just like one of the weaker aspects of that, but like was designed to be the same kind of like terrorizing torture device kind of thing. And here it is just like, this is waterboarding to the extreme of extremes. And of course the Empire would like find that and figure out immediately how to try and use it to their advantage and just extract whatever information they can out of people. So yeah, I love the way the series just approaches, and even like all of the stuff on Narkina 5, the prison stuff being, hey, we found out how to do this, how to make all the prison guards basically police themselves. We put one person in charge of every 50 people, and all we have to do is burn a little electricity and like keep them under our thumb so we can keep that super low staffed and like the never more than 12 guards and all that stuff. And it is just like the prison system cutting every cost they can because these are people that nobody else in the world will care about. And as
no one
we see
knows
here,
no one knows the story, right?
yeah, like it's always like like going back and rewatching it again. It's a like in my head, the PORD that they talk about, like the ordinance that basically like doubles everybody's sentences and completely cracks down stuff. PORD is a thing I use at work to basically like pull all the tables, all the system tables for an order out. And it's basically like how we analyze an order to see if something went wrong in processing or whatever. So like them using that anagram for it is just funny for my personal sense, but it is just this, it is the like, it is the MAGA kind of thing of like we've put together a catchy thing, and it's not going to affect the people that like we care about it affecting. The people it affects are people that we can get away with punishing because nobody will ever know, and nobody cares because we've told the universe that these are bad people, they've committed a crime, even though we have in cases like Cassian, nope, he was just completely wrong place, wrong time. I mean, yeah, he definitely committed crimes, but not the ones they
but not that one, right?
pinged him for or whatever. And it is just the again the banality of what finally gets him sent to prison of like he didn't do anything. He literally didn't do anything. A guard just like looked at him the wrong way basically and assumed the worst. And maybe there is supposed to be a sense of profiling in there as well. I don't think the series really like harped on that being the thing, but yeah, it's just such a like, man, what like of all the luck you got, there are a lot of things in here that just did not go your way, and that's what leads us to this path. So it is a fascinating thing, especially going back and rewatching it so freshly. Like he has basically as many lucky things happen to him as he does unlucky things happen to him that make it much more interesting and make it feel like it's not just a series of like Deus Ex Machinas or like like Rise of Skywalker has of like just everything is like to get you to the next thing. This does not feel like that. This embraces that sometimes the universe is chaotic and just the completely wrong thing happens and suddenly you're now you've got 6 years in prison, which admittedly is also directly tied to the thing you just did in Aldhani because that led to the tightening of everything and whatnot. So like it is a weird like cosmic karma-ish kind of thing. But it is such just like a disjointed, and it shows how disjointed the Empire is, and that it can't really be it is to Nemec's point, like it's an unnatural thing that they're trying to control this much of the galaxy, this much of the universe. And it will fail eventually. It will crack and things will seep through. So yeah, lots of good stuff there.
I think that what Andor does with its focus on a police state. And Nimik's observations and his speech lasts about 2 minutes long, but it is some of the most crystal clear truth that is spoken about police states and authoritarian regimes and fascism anywhere that you're going to find. It is so distilled down and so crystal clear that it is shocking that it is we don't hear it just distilled down to that more often. And I think just his line to be, it is an unnatural thing, right? That is why they seek so much control. That's why they seek so much power, right? Because to be free is the natural state of things. And, I think I like so much what they do with episode 7 and the run-in with this and the fact that he does nothing wrong, right? The fact that is what gets Cassian in prison, I think, is such a smart decision, that through no fault of his own. So he can just see just how utterly corrupt and morally bankrupt and empty this, empire is, that by doing nothing wrong, he's still going to get a 6-year prison sentence. And that can kind of help splash the water on his eyes, right? And then you get to Kino 5, right? And we haven't spoken a lot about him, but like Kino and everything about his character, right? And, I've got 240 days left. Like, don't ruin that for me, right? Like, just get in shape, get in line. That's all I'm here for, right? And that character's evolution, all the way building up to knowing while he's in the control booth, giving the speech of one way out, one way out, one way out, that he doesn't have a way out, right? That he can't swim. And the kind of mixture of like triumph and joy and sorrow and sadness that kind of flush across Andy Serkis' face in that moment as they get to the end and they're all kind of falling off the thing and jumping off, I think is like masterfully done, right? Like Andy Serkis is I think in so many ways a criminally underappreciated acting talent because he's so often doing motion capture and voice acting. And so I love that we can get his actual presence on screen just so people can see just how phenomenal he is. If you're someone who's watched the Planet of the Apes trilogy, right, and his performance as Caesar, if you're someone who's watched, obviously, him as Gollum to go way back, he's routinely delivering some of film's finest performances as an actor, but just sort of being disrespected about it because they're not a live action performance. And he absolutely stands out as one of, I think, the strongest characters in the entire series. And his evolution and his arc and his final fiery speech at the end there of One Way Out is, I think, arguably maybe the kind of high point of the entire season is right there in that moment. And we kind of climax right there and get like a 2-episode, denouement afterwards. And it is just incredible and sad, and I love the fact that we don't know what happens, right? Like I'm sure they'll probably make at some point in time like a Kino graphic novel or comic book or something like that, but like I kind of hope they don't, right? Like I don't want to know what happens to Kino. I don't want to know if he finds a flotation device and escapes safely, or if he like jumps off just to like die, because he'd rather, as you said, like I'd rather die being free, right, than not. And
well, that's and even that is him quoting Cassian, who said
Cassian back to him. Rebellions are built on hope, right? And the way that Generoso reflects that back to him. Like one of the things I think is really smart about this series too is it's kind of the way it digs into the fact that like Cassian is a natural leader and someone who people gravitate towards, but who constantly, all the way through to his death, eschews leadership and instead kind of pushes other people into the limelight and other people to be better, right? Mm-hmm. And that is also something that he does with Jin. I think it's something that he pretty clearly does with Kino, but it's also something that he does in smaller ways with other characters around him, right? Like he does with Nimik and he does with Val. And like, I think the relationships that he fosters in this show are so complex and rich. And I love the fact that despite everything he says, he's sort of the perfect epitome and representation of what the Empire isn't, right? He's someone who has this natural ability and way about him that could just lead him to be powerful and seek out power and that kind of stuff. And instead, he constantly chooses to eschew power and put other people forward. It's the exact thing that the imperial system doesn't do, right? It's always someone trying to like stab you in the back to kind of promote themselves, right? All the way up to the emperor himself is exactly what he did, right? And Andor is sort of the epitome of not doing that, right? Of thinking of others and others' abilities and talents and skills before your own. And I just think we said at the very beginning of this podcast that Cassian is such a weird choice to have built a series around. And you already said it, and I'll kind of end on it too. He, in some ways, is the perfect person to build a series on. He's, in some ways, the perfect representation of what the rebellion is, right? And who the rebellion is, right? Someone who begrudgingly at first and fits and starts, but ultimately just cares so much about others and wants to see others succeed, even if it doesn't benefit him. In fact, even if it hurts him, he just sort of can't help but have others succeed. And he is the rebellion and the Rebel Alliance more than anyone else. He's just such a brilliantly crafted character. And Diego Luna is fantastic as Cassian, I think, throughout this series. And to me is just such a masterful performance in terms of just like wordless, dialogue-free, just facial expressions and body language acting. Diego Luna does such a great job as Cassian, I think, throughout the show. And you already touched on the fact that there are whole sequences without any words being said, but just the various actors, whether it's Diego Luna or Stellan Skarsgård or Fiona Shaw, I think they just sort of are all such top-notch performers and actors, and the way they can show so much emotion with just the smallest like flutter of their eyes or kind of grimaces or glances, right? And Mon Mothma, we haven't literally talked about it all pretty much, and
I was definitely going to.
That's all that character does.
Point us in that direction, yeah.
Masterful throughout, and her whole arc, and kind of the last image we get of her is such a sad one, right? It's such a tragic, kind of heartbreaking one, right? Of this kind of like deal with the devil she's made. And I just think it is brilliant. And her performance is one of the most understated, but also I think easily one of the strongest of the series. And that is an incredibly high bar. And I think she absolutely clears it.
Indeed. I think I was definitely going to be like, we haven't talked about Mon Mothma. I definitely want to hone in on that arc, because especially on a rewatch, another character not introduced until episode 4. So we didn't talk about her at all when we did the initial That D Plus stuff. Like, we knew she was going to be in the series, but we didn't know to like what extent. And so the fact that basically like the rest of the series after that point is like, she's got the B or C plot in every episode kind of thing. And it is like, she's helping finance this, but that's coming at a cost. Like, obviously her personal life in shambles, her arranged marriage, and like just learning just more about Mon Mothma and the Chandrilan culture and all these little like elements and stuff like that. Like seeing how her daughter's becoming super like conservative in response to her being super progressive and all that stuff, like that aspect of the character, seeing this like completely loveless marriage with Perrin. And
Perrin was super interesting too, right? Like the fact that they keep mentioning multiple times, like he was the young firebrand, right, at like the academy, and like what happened to his character and like where he's at now, I also think is super interesting.
Yeah. And so it is this like idea of like getting to see her breaking more and more, like, and it's one of those, like, it got introduced in a deleted scene in Revenge of the Sith of her and like Bail Organa were going to be kind of like this cadre of Padme's like allies or whatever in the Senate, but like seeing her, like, it wouldn't surprise me if we have some kind of sequence between her and Bail Organa in season 2 and stuff.
I'm surprised he wasn't in this season, honestly. I kept expecting Bail Organa to make an appearance.
Yeah. But like just I almost like that it wasn't, because that would be falling a little bit back into the like let's pepper in guest stars and stuff like that this series does need. Like Saw Gerrera is like the most we get of that, and it makes sense because he's doing, all this like super rebellious stuff, that Luthen would have some kind of like connection with him and try and like bringing him into the fold the couple times that he does. But I love that we just get like Mon Mothma's like struggles with these challenges that she's going through, and that it is that like it is the super like prequel-y aspect of like it's it's a trade embargo kind of thing. Here it is, banking laws are being cracked down on, so she can't just move the money that she's used to moving, and so now she's struggling and trying to find a solution for that, and bringing in her very close like circle. Like she talks about when she's talking to her ally Tay, she talks about like, I'm about to tell you something only 3 other people in this galaxy know, kind of thing. And it's like, I was like, who are? Oh, it's like so she's kept it so close to the chest that it is Luthen, Clea, Luthen's assistant, and Vel, who we find out is her cousin. Like those are the 3 people that know she's really kind of working with the rebels and stuff like that. Everything else she is having to put on this front, and she does it so wonderfully. Like from the off, she knows that her driver's a spy, just kind of like, and so she has to kind of keep her eye, keep careful around him, or by the end of the series, use him to her advantage and plant this rumor of Perrin gambling again, and that's how she can explain away the money, the missing 400,000 credits, if she needs to pull that card at some point or something like that. She's playing the game within the rules that have been set forth for her, and it's cool just getting to see her learn to do that, especially like as a character who is just kind of like a barely there character in the original series. Like, cool that we're getting to see another character from the rebellion kind of built up in this fascinating way, and I like, she's one I'm almost looking more forward to her story in season 2 than Cassian's, because I think Cassian has such a great arc and like was already put on such a great trajectory in this one. I want to see how Mon Mothma goes from being the like outspoken senator that she is to fully like kind of
the leader of the Rebel Alliance.
Yeah, leaving the Senate behind and saying like, I can't get things done there. We need force. We need to do it this way.
Right. I think her character is so fascinating, right? And in some ways is sort of, Cassian ultimately gets a really kind of triumphant high to end the series on, and Mon Mothma in a lot of ways kind of gets the opposite of that. Her last scene is just heartbreaking, and I love that, right? We so often make these figures like Mon Mothma, right? And I think the easy comparison I'm going to go with is like a George Washington. It's so often so easy to view them as not people, but like marble statues, right? Who do no wrong and say no wrong and came out of the womb, already immortalized in, marble, right? And clay. And I just think they're obviously always more complex than that and more multi-layered than that. And they had to get to that final point, right? And the journey there can be so engrossing and enriching and sad and difficult. And I love that we see so much of that in Mon Mothma, right? Because she's only in episode 6, just like Palpatine in the original trilogy. And she is already, she is Mon Mothma in that moment, right? Like, she is who she is. She's the leader of the Rebel Alliance. Like, she's fully formed already by that point. But that's 8 or 9 years from now, right? And she's very much still finding her way and finding her journey, right? And, one of the things I love that the series does is that it's set when it is, right? So we know that they talk about the fact that like 5 years in the past, Cassian deserted, and that's how he survived when he was serving in like the Imperial place. And 5 years from now, he's going to fight and he's going to die for a cause, right? And this moment right here, he's sort of in between those two things, both in a timeline, but also in like a sense of flux. Like, he's not quite the person who's going to desert and leave, but he's also not quite the person who's going to fight and die for a cause. And we see that change happen over these 12 episodes, right? So at the end of the series, that's literally the bargain he's making. Like, kill me or let me join. Let me fight for something, right? To Luthen. And I think getting to see a similar arc in Mon Mothma is going to be really interesting too, because right now she is someone of incredible privilege like George Washington, and power, and she could just relax and enjoy her life and have parties and drink with Perrin and do that, and that'd be fine. No one would begrudge her that at all. That's the station in life she has. Or she could just be someone who kind of criticizes the Empire, but that's the extent of it, right? And doesn't really go any further. And to see the point at which she will eventually obviously leave the Senate, become a criminal in the eyes of the Empire, and become kind of, the brains of the Rebel Alliance. I'm so interested to see that in the second season, right? Like I totally agree. Like in some ways that is what I find almost more compelling, is to see, especially knowing the structure of what that season's going to be like. These kind of 3 episodes going to be like 1 year jumps at a time. I'm really excited to see what the evolution of her character will be within that. In some ways more than Cassian's, because we both A, know where his journey is going to end, and B, sort of have already gotten to that point now at episode 12, right? Like if this had just been one season and it's just like a limited season run of Andor and that was all we were ever going to get, I'm utterly happy with how Cassian's story would end in this series. Whereas I want so much more from Mon Mothma's story, right? And so I hope that is something that they make a bigger element of season 2, along with obviously like another person we've talked kind of sporadically about through this thing, but like, what is Luthen's journey? What is his destination? Where is his arc going, right? Like, I love all of his scenes with Mon, right? And they're kind of philosophical back and forth, and him sacrificing Krieger and him sacrificing so much to kind of pursue the movement, and the inevitable continuous button of heads the two of them are going to have, right? Especially as Mon sort of dives more and more and more into the inner workings of the rebellion and kind of bringing together the disparate parties that Luthen's kind of already started to do here. I'm so curious to see how their paths intertwine, and also the fact that Luthen is one of the biggest characters in Andor who we don't know what his fate is. We don't know what's going to happen with him, right? He could be someone who is just who's just in the loo, right? In episode 4, we don't see him there, right? And who is, on some other planet in Empire Strikes Back, right? And maybe he's in the background dancing with the Ewoks in episode 6. Like, I want to know what his journey is, or if he is just someone who can't ever have that moment, right, in the sun, and who is just gonna die fighting this, maybe before A New Hope, maybe sometime after. Like, I don't know what it is, but like, that's a character too that I just want to see more of their story arcs going forward, as they kind of bring the Alliance into an actual tangible thing instead of like 24 disparate fighting forces.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because this is also the time frame that Rebels takes place in, and it's like, it was especially interesting when they're like, we're going to codename this character Axis because he's at the center point of bringing these things together, and Rebels very much has like an arc around the character, the pseudonym of Fulcrum. It's like, oh, the ISB does love their mechanical nicknames for characters. But yeah, I think I'm very fascinated because like through luck, really, like Deidre does get on the case of Axis, because like she ends up making the right assumptions, but like sometimes for the wrong reasons, or she ends up landing with the right answer, but she got there the wrong way. But ultimately, that's not going to matter. The ends are going to justify the means in that sense. And so yeah, I very much like I imagine that like Cyril is going to somehow be involved in bringing him down, because Cyril did see the guy and knows his voice and could ID him. I was almost expecting Luthen to say something in Ferrix at the end there, and like Cyril to like turn and like recognize him, because I honestly, going into the finale, I was like, Stellan Skarsgård is a big name. They probably only signed him for one season. He's going to Sean Bean this thing, and he's going to be in here for the one season, and then next season's going to be about Clea taking the mantle or what, like or Vel. But no, he survived to live the day and bring Cassian directly under his wing and stuff. So yeah, I definitely think, like, I think he foreshadows it so much in his speech that he's not going to live to see the end of this revolution. So I can't imagine he survives through the series. But it is still going to, it's still very much like I'm fascinated by the journey that he's going to take to be there. and love, like, yeah, I love how he continues to like play with people, how he, like, I love the two-faced nature of the character throughout the entire series. Not only his like his who Luthen is when he's out on, you know, out on patrol or out on a planet or whatever, but then who Luthen is back at the gallery and stuff. But then, like,
very flamboyant, man.
Exactly. Right, yeah. But even like the banter that introduces the Luthen and Saw dynamic of like both of them like not wanting to take credit for Aldhani, but both of them like thinking the other, even though Luthen knows absolutely it was 100% him. But like the game that they're playing of like not letting the other people in, not like still keeping everybody at arm's length. I think there's so much fun to be had there, and it's almost like it's sad that, like, I think because of Rogue One, really, like, Saw is the best viewpoint that we have of that kind of like cell, because they could certainly play with the idea of, in Andor Season 2, Luthen meeting even like the crew of the Ghost from Rebels or something like that and trying to bring other different cells together. But I think the animation side of things is still so disparate in a lot of ways that they would have to introduce other new characters like Anton Krieger or whatever. And so, like, it's not unheard, like, it's not that they can't be done, but it will be very much like will they, how deep in the weeds will we get into seeing different cells of the rebellion get brought together by Luthen, or is that going to be continually just disparate? Like, maybe we just see him spending a lot of time with Saw or with Cassian, and not really with other segments or something like that. But yeah, it'll be very fascinating. I'm at the same way, like, very excited for season 2, and then very sad that like we're only going to get a season 2.
2 season, right?
But you know, that's the story you have to tell. Then tell a kick-ass story, and we can just always go back and revisit it, like I did over the last 2 days and had a great time. Because this is, if not, I mean, I think there is easily a case to be made that this is the best storytelling that Star Wars has ever done, even if, for nostalgic sake, Empire Strikes Back might still be a favorite Star Wars thing. I think this, I could make an argument that this is the best Star Wars thing, especially since it's all subjective anyway. But and again, to the credit of the series, it has way more time to play with ideas and characters than a movie does. But yeah, it is like, I remember the end of the Prison Break episode, end of episode 10, like walking away from that episode and being like, even if they completely biff the next 2 episodes somehow, which I don't think they're going to do, this is easily the best Star Wars thing I've seen in probably 10 years. And I like, and then they don't biff the next 2 episodes. Like they're still, like, it's definitely a more condensed story, but it's also paying off so many other things that have been set up throughout the entire season. Even going back to the first episode of that guy trying to shake Cassian down for his money, coming back around and trying to be an informant, and then, you know, paying the price for being that informant. There's just like so much great stuff in how the series like continues to plant a seed and then watch it grow over the course of an episode, or come back and revisit it, you know, episodes later, and you see how something pays off. It's just such a tightly knit story that, like, there wasn't a miss. It's great. And in the cases where there is setup, like, we talked obviously a lot about that first, you know, arc, back when we did that D+ show. And then you kind of dip back down to the beginning of an Aldhani story, and then the middle part of an Aldhani story. But, like, you know from the beginning, okay, they've set the stakes that this arc is going to end with this heist. That's going to be cool. How is that going to play out? And then, like, it is plays out in the coolest of ways. Like, you get to see how all these different characters are playing the role. Many of them don't make it out because of, again, sometimes just pure luck, or, you know, an overly ambitious guy who, I think this is another thing that the series does so great. Like, the guy who ends up basically like overhearing on the radio and stuff, and coming down and inspecting. Like, a weaker show could have just had that guy do that. But this one takes the time to introduce that character in an earlier episode, set up a relationship between him and the Lieutenant Dorn, like introduce this guy as kind of a layabout who basically just ends up having a really good day when he stumbles into the heist. And I think the series just does that over and over again. It introduces a character that is going to like it takes the time to introduce these characters rather than just have them come out of nowhere, right. or in unsatisfying ways like that. When they come back into the fold, it's great. And yeah, I think the visual of flying out of the thing and into the eye, which has been like set up as like this cool visual thing, but like it wasn't until like we actually see it that I'm like, oh my God, it is like an eye, and all of these things are the veins and they're flying into the pupil of the eye. How fucking cool that is, and how cool that looks. And like, yeah, just it's a good show, and it does such a great job of like also just fleshing out worlds and lore and stuff like that. Like all the Aldani people and kind of the history that gets peppered in over the course of those few episodes, all the Chandrillan stuff and culture that gets introduced, as just like flavoring for the stuff. It's not critical to plot points or anything like that, but it is just that extra little thing that like takes it from being a 9 to a 10.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's all. Yeah. Brilliantly said. Right. And I think that, I don't know, as someone who is such a big Star Wars fan and has had some of the issues I've had with some of the newer things, I think one element of Andor that I really love is for a show that is so un-Star Wars, it is also the most Star Wars thing I've seen. I mean, at least since the prequels, but yeah, arguably since the original trilogy. It is so Star Wars, I think, in its themes and stories and scale and characters and ideas. And, it is such a great example. We've talked a lot about on the various podcasts about how like Star Wars is political from its conception and idea, from its genesis, from the seed of what the series is. It is a anti-Vietnam War allegory, and also an anti-fascist allegory. Like, it's right there from the heart. You don't have to search hard to find all the anti-Nazi images in the Empire. They're pretty blatant.
Oh, the bad guys are stormtroopers? Like,
right, yeah,
Nazi stormtroopers? Yeah, pretty much from
literally
day one.
Right there. To like the Nuremberg rally-esque speeches they're given in the original trilogy and in Force Awakens. Like, it's not subtle. It wasn't supposed to be. But somehow along the way, because it's also like a giant fantasy epic, people lost sight of that. But George Lucas never did. He's a radical. And so I love the fact that like this exists, and it is so political, and it is so tied to those kind of roots that we haven't necessarily had since the prequel trilogy, arguably, right? And it's brilliant, and it's great, and it is so smart, and it's so well crafted and written, and it features some of the series' all-time great visuals, not just the eye, which is one of the coolest things in space Star Wars has ever done, but just the cinematography throughout is just exquisite. Like the scene of like Mon as Val leaves, right? And it's just her and like all the archways just completely alone, beautifully done, right? And there's so much small details paid off and so many seeds laid throughout it, right? Like,
or even like I think the sanitary nature of the prison, and like just the like the cleanliness of it, and the
clean white lines of the Empire, right? And I just love the fact that this is, I would say, probably the best thing Star Wars has done since Rogue One, right? Which
easily.
If you go watch the Summer of Star Wars, we all ranted and raved about that movie, obviously. And I just think it is something so special, right? And like you said, like even if it botched the last 2 episodes, it would have still been such a special thing. It doesn't diminish the 10 episodes before it, and it doesn't, right? And even if the second season is whatever it is, it won't diminish how great this first season was, I think. And, I think I've said for years that like Star Wars is such a rich tapestry of a universe with so much potential storytelling possibilities and characters and planets and worlds and ideas to explore. And Andor is doing all of that, and it's doing it without a lightsaber. It's doing it with very minimal stormtroopers. It's doing it with no Sith on screen, and just a bunch of regular people beginning to build a rebellion. And yeah, I just think that is Star Wars, right? Like the royal family of Star Wars, as people kind of derisively call like the Skywalkers at this point, that's not who they were. Right? I talked a lot about this on a couple of different Star Wars shows. We've had like Luke's part of what makes Luke so special, right? And just like this perfect character to build like the entire Star Wars sagas around is because he is just a regular person, right? Like that's the thing. Like in episode 4, when we first meet him, he's just a farm boy in the middle of nowhere who just dreams to do something, anything of importance. And like, I would say arguably Star Wars' most iconic image scene, right, is Luke looking at the twin suns, right, in the sunset and A New Hope. Like that defines so much of the spirit of Star Wars. And, you know, I think after the original trilogy, they sort of lost sight of that. And like what made that so special, what made Luke's arc so special. And Andor absolutely knows what made it special and absolutely knows kind of the core element of what makes Luke and what makes that arc in the original trilogy so brilliant and so one of a kind. And it just absolutely nails it. And yeah, I mean, we can rant and rave all day long. I think it's the best thing Star Wars has done since Rogue One. And if it is not my favorite Star Wars thing, which is not, I mean, the original trilogy just, you just can't beat it. In a lot of ways for me, I think just because of the nostalgia attached to that, it is certainly, I think, exactly what I want for the next evolutionary steps of Star Wars to do. And I would easily take this over a Book of Boba Fett, right? Like even something like Visions, right? Like I like when Star Wars is allowed to be weird. And even if it doesn't always work out, like every episode of Visions isn't a masterpiece, but there are some that are really good. And I will always take something with, you know, a 50, 60, 70% success rate over something that is just like, I don't even know what Book of Boba Fett is. I really like how you can tell how little I think collectively we all thought of it by the fact that there was like basically no podcast discussions around Book of Boba Fett. It's just like, this is a thing that exists in Star Wars and it's fine. Or not. And like Andor is just so much more of a risk and it's great.
Yeah. I think we ultimately did a
maybe we did. I don't know, but I deleted it from my memory the second we did it then.
Yeah. We did a full season on it. I think. That's right. It was just me, Cameron, and Frank. You did not join us for that.
So there you go.
But I just had that, or I just had Andor pulled up in our YouTube content library, because I think that is going to do it for this episode of That Nerdy Site Show. But if you want more thoughts on Andor, you can catch kind of our earliest impressions when me, Cam, and Logan all discussed the first 3 episodes in That D Plus Show, episode 143, or you can go back a couple weeks and watch episode 152 of That D Plus Show, where Cam and I did our kind of like full wrap up on That D Plus Show. But since Logan wasn't around for that one and Logan really wanted to talk Andor, I was happy to sit down and talk about it again. So yes, Andor, real good show. Hope many more people watch it because it was very, very, very good. So let's go around our metaphorical table with any plugs we might have. You can follow Logan at Lefty Logie, Loggy. Anything you want to give a shout out to there, Logan?
Hey, shout out to last week's episode of That Nerdy Shite Show where, well, now I'm getting all confused again, but I'm pretty sure it was the World Cup. Yeah, it was the World Cup episode. Myself, Cameron, and Trevor talked about the World Cup as well as Trevor's Disneyland trips, seeing Walt Disney's old apartment at Disneyland above the firehouse. And it's especially topical today, obviously, as the World Cup final officially happened today, and it was one of the greatest games you're ever going to see in soccer. It's brilliant. So go check out that episode. Go see me, be excited about it. Cameron, take the conversation off the rail real quick about the World Cup, and Trevor get real giddy about Disneyland. It's a great time all around. Peak us content. If I've ever heard things, Trevor being excited about Disneyland, me being excited about anything, and Cameron sort of taking the topic
Going
off the rail.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. That is peak That Nerdy Site show. So go check that out for sure.
That is Cameron to a T, indeed. You can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey. In addition to shouting that out, I will also shout out our That D Plus show this last week of The Santa Claus 3. Which we're
doing Home Alone 3. I just got so excited for that.
Yep, this coming week we'll be doing Home Alone 3, and then on the Let's Play side of things, this week will be a return to Skyrim. I've already got the next 2 episodes basically uploaded and ready to go as I continue through the main quest of Skyrim. I don't think I'll end up finishing the game before the end of the year, but I do believe these episodes will bring me into like tying position with Cameron's Time with Dying Light. But to be fair, I've also done way more side quest stuff than he did in his stuff. But yes, Trevor Plays Skyrim, continuing along Tuesdays and Thursdays on youtube.com. But then other times I'm throwing in random other Let's Plays in there, like I did Crisis Core last week and Vampire Survivors, which also a very good game. So yes, go check out all that fun stuff over at That Nerdy Site, or go to thatnerdysite.com or youtube.com/thatnerdysite for all the latest from us. Once again, if you liked what you heard, please rate, review, like, subscribe, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. Thank you again for listening. Stay nerdy, be good to each other. I don't have to say class dismissed on this one like I normally do on that D Plus show, but since it has been our tradition when we wrap up a Star Wars-y thing, I will end with May the Force be with you.